Warning! Tube amplifiers have lethal voltages inside them. Please do not attempt to build, test, or repair these without understanding and following all safety protocols. Hey y'all! Welcome back to the spud amp build. Got all the fabrication done. It's time to start doing the wiring. And like I showed you in the last video, we moved the RCA jacks to the side. Gonna find some little plugs for this, but that's not gonna slow us down. I want to get this mess of wiring sorted out, get this stuff connected to something, or tied off the ones we're not going to use, get the speaker jacks wired, get the IC socket wired, get the switch fixed and wired up, get the AC wiring to the transformers done, and start working on the heater wiring. And hopefully for the end of the episode, we'll be able to power up the heaters and make sure the tube heaters are working, and possibly even start measuring the B+. So let's see how far we get. I want to get this thing finished. Let's get to wiring. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is try to clean up some of this wiring on the output transformer. And I've already worked on this side. As you can see, that's a little neater than this mess we have over here. So what we're doing is we're pulling out the wires that we need. We need this yellow one, and we're going to need this black one. But I want to tie these, or bundle these up so they're not in the way, but still have them available for a future use where I actually may want to, try using these taps. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to cut that one off about that long, and then we're going to stagger them. Cut that one off about that long, and then we're going to come in here with a piece of this heat shrink tubing and put it over all three of those wires. And on this one, I'm actually going to do it on this yellow one on this side, because I want it on the one that's going to be furthest away from where the transformer wires come through the chassis. So on this side it was the negative, but on this side it's going to be the positive. And so it's going to be tied over like this, and this is eventually going to be tied up to this terminal here, and then this is going to loop up and go to that terminal. So let's shrink down this tubing, and then those three wires basically become one. Obviously, they're not electrically connected together, but physically, they're bundled up where they're out of our way. And see, that's already looking so much neater. And then this one's going to come through. What I may do is run this underneath there like that. So to hook up the speaker jack, first thing you want to do is put on this nut. And then with these binding posts, there's two black washers. Then you put the wire through the chassis. Then you have this little T-shaped insulator. Let me scoot this over where you can see it a little better. We have this little T-shaped insulator. And then finally you have the clear plastic part. So the next thing we want to do is we've got this terminal, and we've ground this down a little bit with our Dremel tool to get down to the brass and put some flux on it. So this is ready to put some solder on, and I'm just going to use that to hold it in place while we flow some solder into this little cup here. And you want to heat this up enough where the solder melts when it's touching the speaker post itself, or the binding post itself, and that the solder's not just sitting on top of the brass. And you'll see it when it gets hot enough, the solder starts flowing. And we make a little pool of solder right there. Now the next thing we want to do is get this negative wire, cut it off with about that much sticking out. And then we strip off some of the insulation. And we tin this piece of wire, which means we're just melt a little solder into it. And then after double checking that we have our nut and washers and everything in place, we come in here and heat this up and solder this wire onto the end of this binding post. Just like that. And now we let this cool off and then we can assemble it. So I'm going to go ahead and do this other speaker lead too. Now over here we have the high voltage wires that go to the B plus, and then this one goes to the plate. So same deal, we're not going to be using this blue wire in this application, but we might in a future one. So I'm clipping it off and then putting a piece of heat shrink tubing over these two wires just to neaten things up and get that unused wire out of our way. And then I'm going to come back with another shorter piece of heat shrink tubing, put a double layer over where the end of that wire is, just to be a little extra safe there. And here we go. These are going to be our two B plus wires. And then I'm probably going to go ahead and get my data sheet out, figure out which one of these is the plate, and go ahead and solder this wire in place just to kind of get it tagged down out of the way. And then I'm going to solder this other speaker terminal up and get the output transformer wiring mostly wired up. And then we can, pull these little wires over here out of the way, and we'll have about half of the bowl of spaghetti cleaned up. Then we can start working on these power wires. So let me get that all neatened up, and then we'll come back and start working on the power wires. Okay, so we got our outputs wired up here, and we are going to be connecting some more stuff here later, but for now, we've got this neatened up. We've got these are going to be our B plus to the output transformers, and we've got the plates hooked up to the output tubes. And I decided to bend this tab over and kind of mount these, or have these lay down low close to the chassis, because we're going to have the inputs come over here across them to these terminal strips that we're going to put right there. But for now, I'm happy with getting this cleaned up. Now we're going to work on the power jack, and let me zoom in here. We've scraped off the paint around this nut. So we've put a 440 screw with a K-nut, and then a solder terminal lug, and then another K-nut, and then that comes over to the safety ground. And this is something we need to make sure is very secure, because this is what will trip the circuit breaker if you have a short inside the amp and that the chassis was getting live, which is obviously not safe. And so make sure you do a nice job with this and put a pretty heavy gauge wire here, because you want this to survive a short and blow the circuit breaker. So the next thing we need to do is, here are heater wires, and for now I'm just going to kind of put those over here out of the way. We're not going to worry about those for right this minute. And this is the extra wire that we're not going to be using with this voltage. This is the 115 volt. And so for now, I'm just going to kind of tuck it right there out of the way. So the two wires we are going to be connecting up are these two, the black and the white. And then these three wires over here are the output or the secondary that go over to the rectifier tube. So we want to connect this black wire to this lower terminal here. This is the unfused one. So let's go ahead and do that. And just put a little loop in it. And that leaves enough wire if we ever decide to repurpose this into another project later. We've got enough wire coming out of the transformer to do so. And then we twist this up. And then bend that up. Put that through. Bend it over. And we come in and solder that lead in place. Like that. Now, the next thing we want to do is we have our switch here. And I think I'm going to run those around kind of like that. I decided to have the wires go in this direction so that it's as much out of the way as possible. And so we're going to have this wire, doesn't matter which one, have one of them loop around and connect to that fused lead. And it's very important that the switch goes to the fused lead. So if the switch shorts out, it will blow the fuse. If you have it on the other side, it won't and could possibly be a safety problem. So, and then we're going to connect these two, this black and this white wire, together. So first I think I'm going to do that. Let's connect this black and this white wire together. And again, I think we can just loop it like that. We've got plenty of room, and I want to leave enough out so that we can put some heat shrink tubing on this without any problem. So let's cut those. I'm going to strip this back, connect into this white wire. And then we want to get a piece of heat shrink tubing that'll just fit over that. I think this green will work good. It's not going to hurt anything to have a little excess. So I'm going to slide this over our black lead like that. And we're going to come in here and tie these two together and solder that. Okay. Check both sides, make sure we got a good connection. Go ahead and let that cool off a second so the heat shrink tubing doesn't shrink while we're trying to pull it up over that connection. And the other thing I kind of do too, if I feel like a little sharp thing, I kind of get my pliers and smush it down so it's smooth. Because you don't want anything like one little strand sticking up that might pierce through the heat shrink tubing. Get that centered over our joint and shrink the tubing down. Just like that. And then, I think I wanted to go under there like that. That's going to sit like this. Just kind of loop that around and then loop that one. Trim that off. Put that through the hole. Solder this guy in place. And then we have all of our primary AC wiring and ground done. And that's kind of why I like putting these little switches in the back like this. It keeps all the AC wiring in this one little spot back here. So this is our hot lead going to the switch that's fused, because the fuse is across here. And then it goes to the switch. Then it comes back out of the switch to this white wire that goes to the primary. And then this black wire comes over and connects to what would be considered the neutral. And then obviously we have our safety ground connected here. So the next thing I want to do is go ahead and connect these two wires over here to the rectifier tube. And I like just trimming off the tabs that I know I'm not going to use, or the terminals I know I'm not going to use. And then I put a little red nail polish there just so I'll know hey, those are the two that I want to hook the secondary to. And I want to loop that up like that so we have plenty of room, because we're probably going to be putting our little choke over here. So I'm going to trim that off about there. Strip this back. Fold that up. And then come in and solder this one. This will be the first time I've used a 9-pin rectifier tube, but this transformer didn't have 5-volt heaters, and so this looks like a fairly good rectifier tube from the reviews I've read on it, so I think it'll work great. Then we're gonna, and remember, this one with the stripe is a center tap. We don't want to use that. That's gonna come over here and go to our ground star point. But this other one's gonna come over, and we're just gonna loop it up like that. Now, if we really wanted to be neat, we could have put a little heat shrink tubing on these two where they come over, but I didn't, and I'm not gonna go back and do that. But you might want to do that on yours if you want to make it look neat. And obviously, be very careful. That's why I hate stranded wire. You can have one little tiny strand get loose and cause a problem. So make sure you look really close and make sure you don't have any loose strands that could end up bridging across other pins and causing an issue. So come in here and solder this, and there we go. So we got all that done. The next thing that I want to do is deal with our heater wires, and I think what I'm going to do is put a 3-terminal strip right here, and then tie these 2 big fat wires. You'll twist these up and then go across this 3-terminal strip here, and then put a couple of 100 ohm resistors to this center pin, or the center terminal, and then we're going to run a ground wire over here to our star ground point. So before I bolt this down, I want to go ahead and solder a little piece of black wire that's going to go from here over to wherever our star ground point is over here. So let me grab a little piece of black wire, and then I'm going to solder this in here like this before I bolt this down, because once you bolt this down, it's going to be hard to solder something to this. So I think I'm going to go off camera for a minute and solder up this little heater wire to this 3-wire strip and figure out how I want to lay out the capacitors around this rectifier tube. So I'll be right back. Okay, so I've run these heater wires from the transformer up to this 3-terminal strip that I bolted onto one of the bolts that holds down the transformer. And let me zoom in here, and you can see I soldered to the lower hole in these 2 outboard terminals, and in the center one I've got a ground wire that's going to come over to our star ground, and then we're going to run the 6.3 volt heaters off of these 2 terminals over to the tubes, and then we'll put a 100 ohm resistor across each side of this to ground to create our virtual center tap, which helps reduce hum. So then I started looking at how do I want to lay out the B+ rectification filtering little network over here in this corner, and I want to try to keep it all on this side of the amp, like from here over. And so I put a 5-terminal strip right here on this screw that's holding down the tube socket, and this is going to be our star ground point. And I'm going to take this socket back out and scrape the paint or the powder coat off of the chassis where this bolts down, so we get a good solid connection to the chassis ground for our star ground point. And then this is our center tap from the transformer. So I'm going to make these 3 pins grounds. And the way I'm going to do this, is I've done this on other amps and it worked really well, is take this wire and strip it back from here out, and then put it through this lower hole, and then bend it over at 90 degrees over across these three terminals down at the bottom, and solder it across all of them to create like a little ground bus here on these three terminals. And that gives us plenty of place to bring grounds over to the start ground point, because we're going to have to ground these negative speaker terminals. We're going to have grounds over here from these output tubes that we're going to be bringing over here, and so that's where we're going to make our start ground point. We're also going to solder this ground wire from this center tap to our start ground point. And we can put this little 33 UF 350 volt cap. We can run a wire from this terminal, which I believe is terminal 3. It's going to be where the voltage comes out of our rectifier tube, and we can just run it from here over to this pin here. And then looks like there's going to be room to put the little choke up here in this corner, right here. You know, up towards toward the bottom. You know, so we've got some room between this and the tube socket. So we'll have a couple of screws coming in the side here. I want to keep the front clean if I can. And so we'll have a couple of screws coming in the side. We can run the choke from this pin over to this pin, and then this will be our B+. The last thing we've got is that we've got this pretty big cap that I think can sit somewhere like right there, and we can hook this pin to this terminal, and then we can hook this lead to our B+. So we'll have the negative and the positive, put this cap across the ground and our B+, and then we can bring these two wires from the transformer over, and they can connect to our B+ too without having to do anything special. And so I think that's going to work out good. And then, I'll figure out, we're going to have, there's I think another cap and a resistor that are feeding the screens of the output tubes, and we may put another 3-terminal strip over here to deal with that little RC network. And I'll worry about wiring up these output tubes later, but I want to go ahead and mount and wire, get all of this over here hooked up. And the other thing that's going to be a little tricky is getting the 6.3 volts over to the heaters, which are these two pins right here. So I want to run the heater wires, a twisted pair, like over, around, and back over here. And then the other heaters are going to come down like this to this corner, and then across and up to this tube, and then up to this tube. So I think I'm going to get back off camera and work on getting this filtering network, get our B+ and all this wired up, and also go ahead and get the heater wires fabricated up and run in where they're going to be. And at that point, we should be ready to power up the amp with the output tubes in, check the heaters, and then if that looks good, we'll put the rectifier tube in and bring it up on a variac and see what our B+ looks like. So we'll be back in a little bit. Well, I feel like we got a lot done this episode. I was glad to see this much of the wiring getting done. This is a pretty simple project, so I think we can probably finish up the wiring in one more video and then get to testing this thing, which will circle us back around to our preamp shootout, which was the whole purpose of building this thing. So anyway, I think this is a fun build. Hopefully some of you guys are excited about this. Again, I would say wait, let me test this thing before y'all are ordering parts and building this thing, because I have no idea what this thing sounds like or how it's going to perform. Somebody else built one of these, they like it, but until I test it and hear it for myself, I'm not going to give it the skunky seal of approval or even put a Skokie Design logo on the thing until I've made sure this thing does what it's supposed to. And there's several things we may try, as far as maybe even try running it as triodes with no feedback. Don't know yet. So stay tuned. Hope you're enjoying the series. If you are, please subscribe. Please like the video. And we'll see you soon for more EL84 fun. Have a great day.